Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Power Pivots. My name is Scott Armstrong from Limitless, and I'm glad you've joined us today. Today we have an incredible guest here, and if you don't believe in 3 degrees of separation, you should start. My guest today is reluctant author, or nascent author to begin with, Paul Young. Paul came to my pathway because of celebrity, but is on this podcast because of his life. Paul Young is the author, I think it was in 2005, of The Shack, which was released as a movie in 2017. He sold over 20 million copies of The Shack, Paul. I think that was the last number I had been able to find. But he's authored, 10 or more other titles. And, it's an incredible thing to have that. And we'll weave, Paul, some of your story into that. But first of all, I want to say welcome and thank you so much for joining us on Power Pivots.
Oh, honored to be with you, especially since you're a Canuck.
Yes. It's another thing. Paul's from Grand Prairie, and we were just out in Saskatoon, which is where we connected a little while ago. Paul lives in Oregon now, his wife, Kim, and he's got 6 kids and numerous grandchildren around there right now.
You bet. 12 grandbabies who are all 10 years old and under.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you want to get into Paul's good books, come this Friday. A week this Friday is May the 11th, and Paul will be the calendar. So sweet. So a Taurus kind of guy. Hey, so we'll catch to all the writings and pieces now, but the piece that really got me is you grew up in West Papua with the Dani tribe.
Yeah, and it's West Papua.
Papua, thank you.
And it's Donnie.
Donnie, you see, yep. I knew I'd mix up both of those on there. Technologically, a Stone Age tribe was the words that I had heard. But
correct. When we first went in, because we were the first in, my parents were pioneer missionaries, and I was a year old. So that was the world I grew up in, was in Cannibal Valley. It was a large tribe. New Guinea is very odd. It has over 800 unrelated language groups. Unrelated. That's what I say. They're still looking for the Tower of Babel somewhere in the middle of the island.
And so how many years did you spend there?
We came back to Canada when I was just about 10 years old. So,
okay. So a lot of your formative years in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us how that helped define who you were and the experiences that you had, because that's an incredible story in of itself.
Yeah, when you grow up a certain way, you just think it's normal until you get outside your world. You come back to Canada and you find out that not everybody grew up around cannibals, mm-hmm. and or cannibals of a different kind, I suppose. And
clarify the cannibalism thing, because I know we've had a Western culture interpretation of that.
Yeah.
How does it manifest itself in reality there?
So it was never a food item. It never was to change your view of finger food. But sorry about that. And but they did it for ritualistic purposes, and they did it in usually 2 situations. One is where they want to defame an enemy and violate an enemy.
Yes.
And the second one was when they had such high respect for an enemy that they wanted to inculcate that person's power and prowess into their being. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a common thing, but it was definitely present.
Mm-hmm.
It was a warring tribe. It was our tribe was, 20,000 people over 100 square miles. So mm-hmm. We're not talking about a little village off in the jungle.
Yes,
we're talking about a network of villages and in the valley. And New Guinea, with all the different languages, it was usually landforms that separated everything, rivers or swamps or mountains. New Guinea goes all the way from the coastline, which is right near the equator, all the way up to glaciers.
Wow. So when you're there in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, and tell us if there is such a thing as an average day, what's an average day for a 7 or 8-year-old growing up there?
Well, by the time you're 6, you're sent away to boarding school. So I was sent away to boarding school on the coast.
Okay.
And but before that, an average day was get up very early in the morning, and a Donnie person would come by, pick me up, and I would be with the tribal people all day long until nighttime, mm-hmm. until supper time. And then I was dropped back off. And so there was wonderful things about growing up this way. There were horrendous things about growing up this way.
Give us an example, if you can, of those things.
Well, the wonderful thing is that you're inside of a different world. You're inside of a culture that when you get outside of it, you begin to realize the world is way bigger than you thought, but it's way bigger than the folks where you end up think. So when I came back to Canada, it's very, you're used to this culture, you used to this world, and I have no idea how to fit into it. And I look like I should, because I'm a white guy.
Yep.
And but I didn't know how. So growing up in a multicultural world was a huge advantage in a number of reasons. One is that it gave me a facility to move in and out of culture over time. It was easy to adapt to the culture that I was around, and just the exploration, just to grow up kind of out there in the jungle, and you learn how to hunt, you learn how to play, you learn how to fight, you learn how to stay away from the witches.
Give me something interesting that you had to hunt. You don't strike me as a hunter, but obviously you are.
Well, but there were all these different kind of tree rats. Some of them were as big as big dogs that lived in the trees, and you'd hunt them. And then there were all the field rats and the mice, all kinds of rodents. And so we'd hunt them, or cicadas, yes. Those katydids.
Yes.
But you could roast them up. Yeah. And they were really good tasting. Cicadas are like shrimp, except jungle shrimp.
I've never heard it expressed that way. So with your time there, I think you've given me some roundabout thoughts on this, but give me a couple traits that you as an adolescent going into teenage years acquired because of your time.
Okay, let me give you some of the dark side.
Okay.
So my dad was a very angry young man. And when you're a child and your father is furious and directs that fury towards you, he was a fairly violent disciplinarian. And when he does that, you think that it's got to be your fault. You have no frame of reference. I didn't know that my dad was orphaned when he was 12. I didn't know that he belonged to a huge family. A lot of dysfunction existed in it.
Yes.
I didn't know what a bent and broken man my grandfather was. And so my dad didn't have a capacity for being a father. And that had been broken in him by his father and his father before him. I now know that because I have an aunt, my dad's oldest sister, who's a historian. And she's done the history of Prince Rupert. She's done the history of all kinds of the towns up in the north. But she's done a family history. So I know a lot about my family and where my dad came from. Now, but as a child, you don't know that. You just know that you're bad and the righteous man has declared judgment on your life. So that was a very difficult. I didn't want anything to do with him. He scared me. He terrified me. The spiritual climate was pretty dark too. Spirit worshiping, witch doctors and the old witches that you had to stay away from because they were always trying to stab you with their potato spears. And but I'm
envisioning this, this bamboo spear and
no, it's wood. It's a carved wood spear.
Okay.
And it's a potato stick, because they were agrarian. They had sweet potatoes and so they dig up the sweet potatoes with these sticks. But these old witch ladies were dangerous, but they couldn't run fast. Yeah. And that was your only way. But I grew up with night terrors, literally screaming night terrors, and which was not a good thing. Then before I was 5 years old, because that's my first memories surrounding the sexual abuse that started to happen inside the tribal culture. But at the same time, I felt more linked to the tribal people than I did to my parents, because they raised me.
Yes.
And so it was almost like sexual abuse within your family of origin, but it was within the tribal culture. And then I got shifted out to boarding school when I was 6. And that was a huge shock for me. For one thing, at night, the big boys would come and molest the little boys. And this was in missionary boarding school. And that just shattered my soul. And frankly, in the book, The Shack, Missy represents in part the child who was murdered. that lost the innocence.
Yes.
And that Mackenzie is looking for. And so I found out that I was white, which was a huge disappointment. And I was 4 months later, after my first 4 months in boarding school, I go back to my parents' compound and I call my mother Aunt Betty, because there's 2 women at boarding school named Betty.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of them's Betty White. So, I mean, it seems logical that white women are named Bettys. My mother's name's not Betty. And so that just shows how disassociated I was from any kind of a family system. And that ingrained a level of shame in me that it took decades to work through.
So let's go from when you migrate back to Canada, and you're leaving that culture that had taken care of you in your first years. Now you're with your parents, right? You're back in Canada.
My dad becomes an itinerant pastor. We move around a lot, 13 schools before I graduate high school. But just landing back in a Western culture was just bizarre. And it was, excuse me for a second, I got to turn something off.
It says to your next movie deal, you might want to take.
No, they're probably trying to sell me insurance. So seems to be a thing right about now. We're
back in Canada.
Okay, so landing back in Canada, I'm in a world that I just don't comprehend at all. It's just completely foreign to me. In fact, they tell the story. We landed in Saskatoon. And you mentioned Saskatoon in middle of winter. And we were sick for a few months. And then one day we went out to this thing called a mall, where all these stores were. Yeah. And they had the most amazing thing. They had this room where the door would open up and people would walk into it, and then the door would close and then would open up and they'd come out totally different. And it was like, I'm not going in there. I could come out a really old person. And I don't, it was an elevator, but we'd never seen one before.
What were your coping strategies, Paul, as you're back in Canada, these 13 different schools? It must have been really hard to, if not impossible, to make lasting friendships, to give yourself some sort of balance in those adolescent years.
Well, and especially since I'm coming in the late part of the 60s and I've got a brush cut, wearing khaki shorts because I don't, that's what I wear. And everybody's looking at me oddly. And, the only traction that I could gain in terms of, as I was not a big boy, I was a small boy. And so the bullies were definitely present in that time. Was either wit or humor or sarcasm or telling stories, being intriguing, and that was you. Okay, so these kids don't know anything about other cultures or other worlds, right? Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden you're kind of an anomaly, and that becomes part of your survival mechanism. But I had a whole bunch of survival skills already, and that included being a really good liar. Yeah. I learned that with my dad, that if you could tell the lie, you might get out of the beating, if you got away with it. And
how long did you hang on to that skill?
Let's see how old
that might be a segue, into the 20s if you want to.
No. I held on to it way longer than that.
Okay.
I held on to a few skills like, and you justify it. You shade the truth. You don't, you come up with some kind of noble reason why you do it on behalf of other people. I've heard guys say that they won't tell their wife the truth because it didn't want to bother their wife or give them more pain about their economic situation or whatever. Yeah. And it's just a way of trying to justify your inability to be authentic. You're actually scared of something. And so you shade the truth. Survival mechanism, turning an attack against the person. And one of the advantages of coming from a different culture is that you can see the flaws in the culture that you're in. Mm-hmm. And because they're, people who live in that world, they don't see it and they don't see the inconsistencies, but you do. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody comes to beat you up, you can turn around and hide knives inside words. And I could take a grown man down. Mm-hmm. By turning the conversation back on them. Somehow I'd make it their fault. I remember when Kim and I were first married that she would say, like, how did you do that? I came in here to talk to you about this, and now it's my fault.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have told you how I did it.
Yeah.
It just was a reflex action. Also, hypervigilance, being aware of everything in your surroundings, all where the doors were, where the windows were, and the quickest way out. Disassociation.
So how does a man who's, a boy, teen, young man, who has had all the things that you've begun to talk about? And I know we're only, an inch deep into what you could talk about, right?
Sure.
How do you attract Kim? I mean,
oh my gosh, that's the grace of God, isn't it? So, and you have to understand, this is where the imagery of the shack is helpful for some people, because the shack really represents the house on the inside that people help us build. It's the place where many of us get stuck. But the problem is, it's our own soul. It's our own heart that's broken. And we disassociate ourselves from it because that's the place we store up our shame. We hide our secrets. Our addictions are kept there. And we never want to invite another person there, because we're terrified that if they know the truth about who we are, that we will see the look of disgust on their face that we feel when we look in a mirror.
Yes.
And my survival mechanism, my major one, was to be a performer. But it was a shame-based performance. There are some people who just seem so arrogant because they looks like they just think they're better than everybody. Well, shame-based performance looks just like arrogance, except that it comes from a deep abyss. In other words, I'm performing not because I think I'm better than you. I'm performing because I actually think I'm nothing. And I'm trying to find a way to enter into your world. But it comes across the same a lot of times. And mine was definitely shame-based performance, because turns out years later that I'm actually really smart and I'm really creative. But I wouldn't have believed that in my early 20s. I would have just thought that I fooled you. When I graduated Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude, first in my class, I walked out of graduation thinking I fooled them. And that's what shame does. It's always whispering to you, you're a fraud, you're a fake, you're not enough. And that goes all the way back to my dad. It goes all the way back to the sexual abuse.
So did you not get, for most people going through school, Paul, school is a great source of, self-worth or lack of self-worth. Did you not get, that kind of acknowledgement from your teachers, et cetera, as you performed well in school? Did that not resonate through to you that you were worth something, or did you still just think you were faking it?
I thought I was faking it. And it wasn't until my mid-20s that I had a situation show up that it changed my understanding of at least that much. It didn't deal with the shame or the roots of it.
Yeah.
But at least at that point, I began to realize, you know what? I'm not stupid. And I am creative. And it was because of I went through a testing process for a particular company that I was working for. And it was absolutely objective. They had no investment in me as a human being. It was done by a third party. And it was very intense. And when they came and said all these things about who I was at the other end, it was a shock to me, because there was a lot of good things that they said.
Wow. Did you believe them right away?
Yeah, I kind of had to, because it was so in my face. There was no argument that I could make against it. Now, it didn't solve my addictions, or it didn't solve my hiding, or it didn't solve the roots of the shame, but it gave me a little bit of a place to stand. The problem is, if you don't deal with the roots of stuff, then you attach yourself to the things that you find out are good about you and begin to build an identity there without dealing with your crap, So, being smart and creative actually empowered me to hide better.
Yeah.
And I think I held on to it for a lot longer than some people, because I'm good at it.
So when did you meet Kim, and how did she gotta get you back there?
Yeah. So I graduate from college, and I get hired by a church. Only time I've ever worked for a church, and I'm working with the same age group as I am, the 20s to 30-year-olds. I'm like 22, and and we had the thing going in Portland. We had anywhere from 300 to 700 college kids, or 20s to 30-year-olds. And I'm in charge. One night, it's a Friday night, and Kim walks in with 3 of her 5 sisters. Now, Kim's from a completely different world than me. She is born in Minot, North Dakota, where there's no 50 Shades of nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and her and her 5 sisters, she has 2 brothers also, but her and her 5 sisters are called the Force. So she's a very powerful human being. And she walks in, she's very beautiful, and I notice her, and I'm in charge. So I immediately change what we were planning to do that evening so that we could break up into groups of 2 and pray for each other.
That's beautiful.
You've heard that power corrupts?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how I met Kim. And over the course of the next year, we became friends. I went through a traumatic experience. I was hit by a car as a pedestrian and almost killed, that knocked a good chunk of my memories out, including a relationship that I guess I was in with a girl named Cheryl. And but I have no memory of it, except one little conversation sitting in a car one time. And but because of that, in part, it opened up a pathway in terms of my relationship with Kim. And I married Kim not because I loved her. It's a horrible thing to say, but I did not have the capacity to love anyone at this time. I didn't, but I was smart enough to read the book. So I knew what it was supposed to look like. This is before I even knew that I was smart or creative, right?
So did you con Kim?
I did.
Yeah, you did.
And her mom, which is a miracle too, because they both have really good crap detectors.
I was going to say, she sounds like she would.
Oh, she does.
And you evaded them.
And I did. And totally not fair. Totally not fair. And so you know what, when you're stuck inside of, because I'm still pursuing God with all my heart, because I just have a sense that only God can heal these broken parts of my life. And so I'm not trying to con her. It's more desperation, trying to find a way to be loved or to be seen. And it's just like when you create the facade outside the shack because you don't want anybody to come in there. You don't create the facade in order to fool people. You create it in order to see if there is a way that you can perform perfectly enough to win their affection and approval. Even though the whisper on your shoulder says, you're a fake, you're a fraud. You know, if they only knew. And this is why secrets keep us trapped, because we can't tell them on the one hand, because if we did, then those people would turn their face away from us.
So tell me.
But when they tell us things that keep us alive, like if they're kind or approving, the whisper says, if they only knew the secrets, they wouldn't be offering this. So you're totally trapped by secrets. Yeah.
So tell me how the transparency found you and Kim over time.
Oh my gosh.
Here's you choose to tell us, absolutely.
Yeah, no. Here's what I'd like to say.
Yeah.
One day, I finally figured out how screwed up I was.
Yeah.
So I went and got some help. And I wish that was true. Some of us are so broken that we have to get caught. I'm convinced that the work of God in our lives is in large part to expose the way we've covered up. And in fact, there's the verse that says that the Holy Spirit has come to convict the world of sin. And that includes me. And that word convict in the Greek is the same word as the word to expose. And so exposure is not to humiliate us, even though it's absolutely humiliating. Exposure is not intended to hurt you, but it's a severe mercy. And I got caught. And I'm now 38. We've been married for 14 years. Our 6th child has just been born, Matthew. And January 4th, 94, I get a 1-sentence phone call that absolutely obliterates my world. And to use the facade metaphor, it takes it down. It absolutely uncovers me. And the 1-sentence phone call was from Kim. And she said, I'm waiting for you at your office, a business that I ran. I'm waiting for you at your office, and I know. And what she knew was I was in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. And at that point, if you're going to talk about pivot points, this is you're going to either pivot to turn to face the fury, or you're going to turn away into the darkness and just die. So the choice was really for me between suicide and facing Kim. And to face Kim meant I had to face everything. And to me, it is an absolute miracle that I did not kill myself right at this point.
Can you tell just a little bit? I mean, you must have had emotional oscillations of what to do over that time. What are some of the things that you think brought you away from that decision to take your own life?
I was exhausted. Well, I was exhausted on the one hand in the sense that I knew that I couldn't just run away. I'd run away from everything my whole life. And I couldn't run anywhere where I wouldn't take myself. So that was an issue on the one hand. So the option for suicide, which had always been there, it's the last way to run away before you hit the bottom. And the thought of it was more comforting than actually facing the stuff. But it was like, I've got to at least make this attempt. I've got to at least take the risk, because there's still a drive toward authenticity. If we get past all the ways that we've covered up our identity and who we are, down deep beneath all the crap, there is someone who wants to be true, who wants to be faithful, who wants to be kind, who wants to be generous, who wants to have pure heart. And so that just didn't disappear. And when you're faced with sometimes great loss or cataclysm or confrontation, that part becomes a little more visible at the same time. So it was enough. It was enough. So I walk into this office that Kim has already torn to shreds, and like physically taken it apart. Did I tell you I married the wrath of God?
You just did, but
yeah. Which I now believe is the love of God, who is not going to stand idly by while anything that is not of love's kind remains. And Kim is a fiery fury, and she lit into me. And after about 4 hours, I said to her, if we're going to do this, I need to tell you every secret that I have.
So before you go to there, was Kim ever going to walk away from you? Did you get that?
Well, she had always said our entire marriage with regard to other people, that's the one thing I would never abide, unfaithfulness. Right? And so, yeah, I mean, it was over. Our marriage was over. And, and it was like, all right, now what do I do? So I say to her, if we're going to go down this path, whatever this is, I need to tell you every secret that I have. And because secrets have been killing me my whole life. That's what I said to her. And naively, she said, bring it on.
Yeah. She didn't realize the iceberg that was underneath.
No. And it took me the better part of 4 days to tell her everything she did not know. And it destroyed her. It just absolutely took her apart. And at the end of that evening, the first evening, or at the end of the 4 days, she said, I will never believe another word that comes out of your mouth the rest of your life. Now, the miracle is that she let me stay in the house, for one. And we've had a lot of conversation about this. A couple of years ago, we were talking to Matthew, who was the child who had just been born, our sixth. And Kim said to him, why do you think I let your father stay? And he said, well, I think it's partly because you didn't want the kids to grow up without a father. And she said, yeah, that's part of it. But here's the real reason. As furious as I was, I believed he'd hit the bottom, because not one time did he not own anything. everything. He owned everything. He owned exactly what he'd done. Not one time did he point a finger to blame something or someone or me or anyone else. He owned it. And we didn't make the adultery the new secret. Kim's dad lived with us for 17 years and was living with us during this.
Wow.
Her mom had passed away. And so the two oldest of our kids went through it with us. The youngers, I had to tell them over the course of the next number of years.
Yes.
But everybody in her family knew, which is a huge extended family. Everybody in the community knew. It was like done with secrets.
And so just from a time perspective, Paul, this is 27 years ago?
This is, 1994, January 4th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so a long time.
A long time ago.
And you are still with Kim.
Yeah, we're the best we've ever been.
Yeah.
Now, consequences aren't retributive judgment. Consequences exist because our choices actually matter. And the choices that we make ripple out into the cosmos. They ripple out into our relationships and into everything else. And they feel like judgment, but they exist because we're a high order being and our choices matter. And they are still consequences 20 some years later. I'm not reconciled to everyone that I hurt 20 some years ago. And, but in terms of my relationship with Kim, we're better than we've ever been. Today, we are better than we've ever been and better than we could have been, even though the process was so hard. It took Kim and I 11 years to heal. 11 years.
Wow.
Right? So even though the process was so hard, and there were times where Kim was saying, she said, I wish we could just go back and fake it, that we could, because it's got to be easier than this, you know? And it was hard. It was hard work.
Let me ask you this, if I can. You're talking an 11-year span of healing.
Yeah.
You're only part of your audience after 3 or more decades of just, getting by on the coping skills of presenting falsehoods and all that. During that 11 years of healing, did you ever question that you're doing the right thing? I mean, that's a long time. We have people who can't even focus for a month or a week, let alone sometimes even a day to take the bravery that you're doing. What's your journey like to go through that?
Oh, I'm grateful every day for it, but I'd never want to do it again. Or I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. What I learned right off the bat, a couple of things that really sustained me. And one is that I couldn't heal myself and I needed help. Another thing was that everything in my world reduced to one day, sometimes to 1 hour, sometimes to 1 minute, but never more than one day. And that has never changed. I now live in the grace of just one day. But I was forced there by this situation. And the choice was, are you going to stay inside this and continue to put one foot in front of the other? Are you going to run? Are you going to hide? Are you going to cover up? Are you going to whatever? The other thing that I did was I reached for the yellow pages, and Kim didn't demand anything. She was done, right? And I pulled the yellow pages off the shelf. For those of you who are younger, it used to be a book with everybody's phone number in it.
The heaviest book. Yeah.
And here we are in Portland, Oregon, and I open up the yellow pages under counselors, which I come from a modern evangelical fundamentalist background, and therapists were kind of like on the borderline to the demonic, And but I open it up and I start under counselors. I start with the A's and I work my way down through the list until I run into a one that says Agape Youth and Family Services, agape being the word for love, that God is love. And they have a little box on the side over on the right-hand side, and it says, we specialize in sexual abuse histories. And I thought, I'm going to start here. So I call up total strangers and make an appointment. And I walk in, and Byron, who does the intake on me, says, I think I got the guy for you, introduces me to a man named Scott Mitchell, who becomes my therapist and who becomes my friend. And I sit in front of Scott the first day, and I go, Scott, my life is over. It's over. Everything that I thought was real or true, it's gone. And I don't need anybody to ask me how I feel about this. All I need to know is, do you have the ability to get me from A to Z? Can you get me from A to Z? Mm-hmm. And Scott says, yeah, I can, but it's going to take a year and a half. And I say, I'm in. He goes like, hold on. Mm-hmm. Everybody that's sitting where you are, they always say they're in, but after a couple months, they'll feel a little better about themselves and a little more in control, and they bail out right before the really hard stuff. And I'm going like, right before the really hard stuff. Mm-hmm. But I hit the bottom. When you hit the bottom, you don't think you're smarter than anybody. You're just like, Scott was the first person in my life I had said the words, can you help me? Can you help me? And, because my whole life has been a facade of trying to be perfect. That's what was demanded of me. I thought of God and of my parents and my dad particularly. And I'm done. And it's like, can you help me? And I said, I'm in. He said, yeah. And I said, Scott, I am not going to leave this until you tell me I'm done.
And you honored that.
I did, but I did almost bail out.
Yeah.
Right before the really hard stuff. I hit it. I almost took a trip to Mexico City, because at that point I was so low that I thought maybe the only good thing that Paul Young could ever do in his whole life is to kill himself far enough away from his kids that they would not be the ones that found his body.
Yeah. Wow.
And only through the miraculous intervention of a couple friends who showed up, not knowing where I was at in that moment, was I able to pass through the valley of the shadow of death and go back to working with Scott, which I did.
And you've managed to turn your experiences into a passion, in terms of penning the shack. Was penning the shack, that was more of a family based, was that part of your, your rehabilitation, your therapy?
No, see, and this is one of the beautiful things. The shack is actually written on the other side of this for the most part. It's not like there isn't finish work to do still inside of my soul, inside of my heart. But those 11 years pretty much dismantled me, and I was able to then work on getting to a place where I felt like, you know what, I have no addictions, I have no secrets, and I'm the same person in every situation. Mm-hmm. Right? And it was Kim that had been asking me for about 4 years, going like, so one day as a gift for our children, would you write something that puts in one place how you think, because you think outside the box. And part of that has to do with what we talked about, growing up in a different culture. Mm-hmm. If you read The Shack, you know that it's highly multicultural.
Yes.
There's a reason for that. And it presents God in different imagery. There's a reason for that, because I grew up with the modern Western view of God as Gandalf with a bad attitude. Mm-hmm. Zeus with the lightning forks just waiting on the other side of Jesus. If Jesus doesn't protect me from him, I'm toast. Yes. And so a lot of that goes into this. And I've always written. Writing was always a way for me to try to get the inside world out. And my friends and family and Kim loved what I wrote, but they're my friends and family. And so, but the year 2005, I finally felt healthy enough to do this. And plus I was working 3 jobs and I needed something to give the kids for Christmas. And so I wrote them a story on the train to my main job, and I was shipping out soldering tips and cleaning all the toilets. And
so when I Paul, when I read this, you had no sense of publishing this at all. This was
not at all
family work, and your first printing was something wrong, 12 or 15 books.
15. Yes. 15 copies at Office Depot, off their photocopier.
Yeah.
A little plastic cover and a little spiral thing on the side to make it look cool.
Very cost effective, I'm sure. But then you went and it found its own, organic audience. And you were working out of your garage for a while too, weren't you?
Well, here's the thing. I made the 15 copies. 6 went to the kids. Kim got a copy. The extras I gave to my friends, and a couple of my cousins who live in BC, by the way, and one of them right in your area. And then I went back to work. It was like it did everything I wanted it to do, which is true. And my friends started giving it to their friends. So we had to put a little collection together to make 15 more copies for their friends to keep giving it to their friends. And that one of those copies ended up in the hands of 3 guys in California who immediately wanted to turn it into a movie. Like, and I'm going like, what?
Yeah.
You know? And that started the conversation about actually putting it into print. And it took about a year to get it ready. I'm working 3 jobs and to do the rewrites and everything else. We get it ready. And then we send it to 26 publishers. Half of them faith-based, half of them secular mainstream press, and they all turn it down. They can't figure out what genre it is. The faith people, my people, think it's too edgy, and the secular folks thinks it has too much Jesus in it. And so I'm stuck between edgy and Jesus, you know. Yeah. And what the publishers didn't know was that there are millions of people stuck between edgy and Jesus. Yeah. And yeah. So that's when it was like, how hard is it to publish a book anyway? And so 2 of the 3 guys who wanted to turn it into a movie, they created a publishing house, like for $500. I don't even know what it cost them. And we found a printer down near one of the guys' houses in Los Angeles. And he shipped the books out of his garage at night because he's putting in people's sprinkler systems during the day. And we had no marketing, no promotion because we were in nobody's system. We had a website. Only place you could buy here's the genius. You got to get this. The only place you could buy the book was off the website, but the only place you could find the website was at the back of the book.
That's a closed circle, my friend.
Oh yeah. If you're going to try to prevent God from doing something, put up all the barriers you can.
Yeah.
See how good you can do it. So, and here's the miracle. In a world where the average book sells between 3,000 and 5,000 copies its entire existence, and I didn't know any of this at the time, that if you sold a novel and sold 7,500 copies, you could legitimately put bestseller. Yep. In fact, it's well into the bestseller category.
I know in Canada it's 5,000 or over, and
Yep. Same in the US. And if you could ever get to 100,000, is what the guys wanted to do, then Hollywood will come talk to you about a movie because it's such rarefied air. In the first 13 months, out of a garage, 2 storage units, and a local printer in Los Angeles, in those 13 months, we spent less than $300 in marketing and advertising. We think it was like $245 for an internet ad that never ran.
Yeah.
And but we sold over almost 1.1 million copies out of that garage and 2 storage units, and it was all word of mouth. Yeah. It was such a God thing from the very beginning, and nobody saw it coming. I certainly didn't.
Yeah. How was, and you and I chatted this offline, how was, you strike me as such a humble guy, inquisitive, creative, dynamic, energetic, yes, but humility seems to be a part of your core. And now you're thrust into this scene, which may or may not jibe with who your core is. Well, how did they meet?
Oh my gosh. I'm surrounded by people who love me, but aren't impressed. That's so important. Yeah. Because it's smoke and mirrors, and at least I'm old enough to know it. If I'd have done something like this in my 30s or 40s, it would have absolutely obliterated me and pretty much destroyed all my relationships. And because I had no solid place on the inside. Humility is simply being comfortable inside your own skin. That's to me what it is. Jesus is God's humility. Jesus is God comfortable in his own skin. And so, I know that this is smoke and mirrors, and I'm always pushing back against it because it's a value system that is corrupted by our inability to trust in a God who loves us. And so we create a value system. In fact, here's what's crazy. Our value system has actors and movie stars at the top because we know they're lying to us. At least they're honest about it, you know. So we're going to trust them, and you know, and so, but the whole thing is based on certainty and success that is not true. Success for me is being comfortable inside my own skin. I don't need this notoriety, and I don't need this success. The thing that I tell people about the shack is that two things you have to understand. One is 15 copies did everything I ever wanted the book to do. And the second thing is everything that mattered to me was in place before I wrote the book. Mm-hmm. Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, love. Those were all in place before I wrote the book. And the book hasn't given me any of those things. The thing the book has done, and then everything else that's happened because of it, is that it's given me an invitation to walk on the holy ground of other people's stories. And I'm telling you, it is holy ground. Every human being is a story. And I've been invited into some of the most profoundly hurtful or redemptive stories you can imagine. And I tell people, this is why we're born barefoot, you know? And this also speaks to your question that you'd asked earlier, and had to do with, it's gone. Never mind.
It's okay. If I was any kind of interviewer, I'd be able to pick it up right off here.
No. I didn't answer one of your questions, and it came across my mind for a split second there, and then it was gone again.
I was going to ask, you know, we have a lot of folks who listen to this, and everyone's pivot can be different, and you can have multiple pivots. And, you know, advice, points of wisdom that you would, you know, ask folks to be open to as they contemplate their own.
One is, you can't do this alone, right? I don't think it's possible to come to healing in isolation. You cannot do it with just a mirror, right? You've got to have God with skin on. You got to have people in your life. You have to take the risk of trust when trust is the essential thing that was broken in you. And so you've got to find somebody that you can begin to open your life up to, because we're relational beings. We're made in the image of a God who's never been alone. And aloneness is not how we are. It is contrary to everything that it means to be about being fully human and fully alive. You know, it's the first not good in Genesis. Everything that is dark drives you to isolation and loneliness. You know, lies do, addictions do, failure does, abuse does. You know, everything that is not right with the world will drive you in the direction of isolation. We'll even create a justice system that will put you in isolation. You know, to reinforce your shame.
That's a very framework.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah. So one thing is, you've got to come out of the dark. You've got to tell your secrets. You've got to look at what happened to you. You've got to love yourself enough to take a stand on your own behalf, to ask those kinds of questions. And another thing is, you've got to be open to the fact that it's going to be a very uncomfortable ride. Even changing your mind is uncomfortable. You know, we are so addicted to certainty. This is why trust is such an anomaly for so many of us, especially when trust was broken as a child. You know, because children trust by nature until someone teaches them that it's dangerous. And the journey back to trust is scary. It's absolutely terrifying on the one hand. And the work involved in dealing with your stuff, I mean, it's hard work. It is arduous. It is step by step by step. And you pull away from it and you're drawn back to it. And you pull away from it and you're drawn back to it. And I'm saying, like, just as best you can, simplify your world, keep it inside today's grace, and deal with what's right in front of you. And when too many things are coming at you, pick one. Just pick one.
That's a good point. Yeah. And that's it. We often have our bandwidth too much. Paul, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you so much. I just feel like this could go on, and I we may just stop the recording, and I'll keep asking you these questions because it's an awful lot of stuff. Thank you. I know you're your humility has trumped your busyness over here for you to spend time with us today. I am very grateful that you've managed to do that.
I'm very, very grateful to be invited to participate. Truly honored, and I mean that. And that's part of the wholeness that happens, is that you begin to sense the presence of God in every person, every situation, every moment, every event. And I love living like this. I think this is the way children live. It's the way my grandkids live. And it's a good way to live.
It is. Now you're off to Kansas City tomorrow. Is that where
I just got back from Kansas City. I'm off to Denver tomorrow.
Okay.
And so it'll be a lot of fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so grateful that our paths have had a chance to cross. And
mine too.
And I know the audience and I, if we can ever contribute to your life, and I hope that we paths cross again, I would be very honored with that.
It's inevitable. It's just a matter of time.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Paul Young from Power Pivots. I am just overflowing with hope. Thank you so much.